Prime Minister, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you.
So are these environment laws gone for good, or does it remain your intention to implement them?
Well, it's our intention to proceed with them, but we'll proceed with them on the basis of our values that we put forward. These laws could have been carried at any time over recent months if the Parliament had the numbers to vote for them.
But clearly Roger Cook and the mining industry have a problem with the laws as they stand. You're saying, you're going there later this week, you're saying you stand by them, you'll implement them either if Parliament comes back or take them to the election?
I'm saying what we want to do is to ensure that there is proper protection of the environment, of sustainability, but also speedier approvals for things that should be approved. We want jobs to be created. We want industry to be supported. And that's why we need to get the balance right. Now, this week, we passed some 45 pieces of legislation. There were a number of things which we didn't. Superannuation for those with balances above $3 million, the electoral law reform, this nature positive laws, veterans affairs. I said at the beginning of the week, I made it really clear, as I have for some period of time, David, that we wanted to get legislation passed, but it would be on the basis of our values. And we held the line on areas like housing, and they changed their mind, the Greens political party, and they went through unamended. We will hold to our values. We won't allow any tail to wag the dog. We want to make sure that happens.
On these environment laws, clearly a deal was either close or, according to the Greens, was done. They reckon you'd agreed to it.
Well, of course they'd say that. No, we hadn't, and they don't say that, David. There is no one in the Greens says that I agreed to it, because it wasn't. We were negotiating across the Parliament with the coalition, all the crossbenchers, a range of measures. Things that we didn't have agreement on were put aside. That was one of them.
Okay, there is a draft agreement though, and a letter to you that says draft agreement on the top and spells out what that...
no, there's not, David.
What that meant. Well, I've seen the
a draft letter from who?
A draft agreement from Tanya Plibersek to the Greens laying out the amendments.
Well, there's no draft agreement to me, and what we did was make sure...
You're saying that letter doesn't exist?
Well, no letter to me exists. I was negotiating across the Parliament, and that's how you have to do it. Okay. You can't have 45 sets of negotiations.
But a letter from the Minister to the Greens, that you're saying you weren't aware of that?
Well, that wasn't a letter from me. What we did was go through, and where there wasn't agreement, they were set aside, and we progressed 45 different pieces of legislation. We were disappointed that we didn't get legislation through on superannuation.
No, but sticking with this one, just to be clear, you're saying you weren't aware that the Minister had written a draft agreement letter to the Greens laying out...
Well, we were negotiating through a series of legislation. 45 pieces of legislation went through. Not everything did. But what we assured, what we were certain about, was that we wouldn't make major changes. We wanted to stick to our values. We did that successfully. At the beginning of the week, David, no one was saying that we would pass 45 pieces of legislation.
And I'll come to some of those, but I just want to be clear here, because this agreement or draft agreement did lay out where the Minister would have some power to protect native forests from logging. The Greens were of the view that you had agreed to this, but then hours later...
No, they weren't, David. I don't accept that.
And that's what they've told me.
Well, I don't accept that, because I was there, and we know things that were put aside. Okay. And in the agreements that were done between myself as the Prime Minister and the minor parties across the board, we agreed on most things, but on some things we didn't.
When you told them there was no deal on this, it was you, Adam Bandt, Sarah Hanson-Young, but not...
And Katie Gallagher.
Okay, but not Tanya Plibersek, the Minister. Why not?
Because we had 45 pieces of legislation, David. 45 across the economy, vets affairs, social policy, housing policy. That's what has to happen.
So why is Sarah Hanson-Young there? Wasn't it... You're saying it's a general meeting about all sorts of...
Because she's the Senate leader for the Greens. And Katie Gallagher is the manager of government business for the Labor Party.
Shouldn't you have told your minister, Tanya Plibersek, this was not going to happen before you told the Greens?
We did. We did.
You told Tanya Plibersek before telling the Greens that there was no deal.
We're informed. All of our ministers were informed the whole way through about how
What does that
things
mean?
were
Did you speak to her directly?
I spoke to her directly.
And said there's not a deal with the Greens?
That we're not getting an agreement on that. And as I spoke to all of our ministers, this would have taken, David, in hours of discussions, this would have taken up 10 to 15 minutes.
Really?
Total.
Because I've had some of your caucus colleagues express to me a view that Tanya Plibersek was unnecessarily treated badly by not being informed. You're saying she was informed, that they're wrong.
All ministers were informed, David, the whole way through. And when you're negotiating across the whole parliament, look, we began the year with tax cuts for every single Australian taxpayer. We ended the year with a whole lot of cost of living relief and reform, whether it was support for renters, the childcare wages increases, the legislation across 11 different Treasury bills. So we passed legislation dealing with immediate challenges, but also in the rough seas that we've managed to navigate, we've always had our eyes on the horizon, so that long-term agenda as well, future made in Australia, build-to-rent schemes.
Let's talk about some of the things you did get through. Social media, you passed this world-first ban on kids using social media. How will this work, Prime Minister?
Well, we have 12 months, but what we will do is we've outlined in the legislation, one of the things the legislation makes clear as well, that because technology changes really quickly, we've made sure that the legislation doesn't have to be adjusted every time there's a shift in technology. So there are some powers with the minister, but it's clear as well that the obligation will be on social media companies to do everything they can to make sure that those people under 16 don't have access to social media.
Will any of us have to hand over ID to use social media?
We make it very clear. Those processes in detail will be worked through over the next 12 months, but it made clear as well that it's not about providing ID. We know that social media companies have more information about you and I than some of our friends do. And we know that they're able to do that. The obligations will be on them. And importantly, David, we need to take a bit of a step back. What is this about? I've met parents who've had to bury their children as a result of the impact that social media has had, as a result of bullying, and we need to do something about it. Now, this is world-leading legislation, but I assure you the whole world is watching. This was front page of the New York Times yesterday.
Elon Musk is watching as well, and he called it a backdoor way to control access to the internet by all Australians. Are you prepared to talk to him about what you're doing here?
We'll talk to anyone, David. But with regard to Elon Musk, he has an agenda. He's entitled to push that as the owner of X, formerly known as Twitter.
He's also Donald Trump's right-hand man now.
But we'll engage. We'll engage.
So you'll talk to him?
I'll talk to anyone, David. But we are determined to get this done. The Parliament has overwhelmingly passed this legislation, and it's the right thing to do. I want children to have a childhood. I want them to engage with each other. And when mobile phones were banned in schools, there was criticism of that as well. But guess what? Children's education standards are being lifted. They're engaging with each other. They're playing with each other and engaging in a human-to-human level. And that's what we want to happen.
This social media ban was done relatively quickly. On gambling ads, though, you've had this parliamentary report and unanimous recommendations for more than 18 months now, and we still haven't seen any legislation, any response from the government.
Well, that's not right, David.
What is the government's response?
That's not right, David.
What's the government's response?
We've actually implemented a range of measures. We've banned credit cards for gambling. We've changed the statements at the end of ads from something that was pretty benign into something that is very serious.
But on the recommendation to actually
they were all
phase out gambling ads.
Well, that was one element of a whole range of legislation.
So what's your response
and
on
I'm
that?
going through what we have done, including introducing bet stop. We've done a range of measures.
Well, I'm asking what you can do about their recommendation to phase out ads.
We're continuing to consult. This is a complex area. We want to make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences. But this week, David, you can hardly say this is a government that has sat back.
But will you do something on this before the election?
And hasn't advanced our agenda. Well, the question of getting something through the Parliament is another one, David. What we saw this week is that we've been confronted by an opposition all year, which has chosen to oppose everything, just about. And this week they actually voted against the doxing laws. They voted against anti-money laundering provisions, where people are paying cash from activities unknown to the tune of some of them in the millions of dollars for real estate, for example. And the opposition voted against that.
Are you saying they're turning a blind eye to money laundering by not backing that legislation?
Well, they need to explain why it is that they voted against anti-money laundering legislation in the Parliament, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate this week. And even when it came back on Friday morning, they still voted against it. It's beyond my comprehension why they could do that. But they have had an attitude, David, of just voting against everything. And before this week as well, we had the crossbenchers also being reluctant to pass legislation.
Okay, but the coalition
we had a big breakthrough.
You did.
This week, and it's one which exceeded all expectations, including on this show last week. And so the government has been determined to present our arguments, to make our case, and we've been very successful this week.
Yeah, the coalition did back you on immigration laws. There are three bills in particular that they've backed here. You'll have the power to deport those members of the NZYQ cohort, the former immigration detainees, some of whom have serious criminal convictions. Where will you now send them?
Well, what we won't do is make those announcements on Insiders on a Sunday morning, David. What this does is give the government power to engage with third countries to make sure that we protect Australia's national interests.
Will you use that new power?
Now, we will see, David. We understand that we got confronted by a decision by the High Court, not of our making and not what we wanted. The government has responded to make sure that our only priority here is making sure that we keep Australians safe.
But you're not going to pass a law and then not use it, eh?
And we will do what we need to do to keep Australians safe, and that has been our priority.
You've also passed a law to ban mobile phones in detention centres, something Labor used to oppose. Why do you need to stop people in detention being able to freely communicate?
Because what we want to make sure is that we look after Australia's national interests in keeping people safe. And we have done that, David. Before the last election, there was some questioning of our resolve. What we've been determined to do is to show our strong commitment to keep Australians safe. We have kept Operation Sovereign Borders fully in place. No one who has arrived here by boat has been allowed to settle here. We've done what's necessary. But at the same time, our big focus, David, has been on cost of living pressures which are there, and we've navigated them. We understand that people...
Well, I want to ask you about cost of living.
We understand that people are doing it tough.
Just on that, and clearly there are measures that you've passed this past week that will help on the cost of living front. But I want to show you this, some OECD data on household disposable income. It goes back to pre-COVID, right? So you can see the rise there. But why has, in Australia, household disposable income continued to go down over the last couple of years?
Well, we understand that people are doing it tough. Global inflation has had an impact. Now, inflation peaked higher and earlier overseas than it did here. But our focus has been on providing cost of living support.
Sorry to interrupt, but take a look at this. You talk about the global factor. Other countries, Canada, the OECD average, the US, they're doing better than Australia with disposable income. Why is that?
Because, David, if you look at the middle of the graph, it tells you the story. Inflation peaked higher and earlier overseas than it did here. Interest rates were higher overseas. Inflation was higher and it was earlier. The impact, because of where we are in the supply chain, occurred later here. and hence why inflation, though, that we inherited with a 6 in front of it when we came to office and rising, now has a 2 in front of it and is falling. Real wages are increasing, particularly in areas like childcare and aged care, where we're provided for special increases. We have a rise as well in business investment. We have more small businesses than we've ever had before in Australia.
When is that going to pick up?
Well,
when are our living standards going to pick up?
And as well, we have produced tax cuts for every single Australian taxpayer. Now, all of those measures, David, have been opposed by Peter Dutton. People would have been worse off under Peter Dutton if he had his way, because we would have had none of that cost of living relief. And what we're doing now, David, is outlining what a second term agenda will be, and that Australians will be better off if Labor is able to continue to build on the foundations that we have laid during this first term.
Have you even decided yet when the election will be?
No. I'll decide. I've said very clearly, I know that this is an interest of the media. There was going to be an election in August, September, October, November. I've said the whole way along that 3 years is too short. I think there should be 4-year fixed terms. That hasn't been able to be achieved. Twice that's been tried in referendums and not succeeded. But my starting point is to work from 3 years and to work back from that.
From May?
Yeah, and work back from that.
You need a reason to go before then.
Well, we'll make a decision when we make a decision.
Parliament will come back, though, in February.
In partnership. That's certainly our intention.
Yep.
And I've foreshadowed the whole way through, David. I have spoken about 2025 as being the election year.
Right. So we've got a bit of time before.
That clearly is when it is going to be, in spite of the rather bizarre suggestion from Peter Dutton, who has called for an election twice. He called for an election this week to happen in New Year's week, and he called for an election because he was so opposed to our tax cuts for every single Australian taxpayer. I recall that.
Look, I mentioned earlier Justin Trudeau's paid a visit to Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. You're not planning any sort of drop-in over the summer?
Well, Justin Trudeau has a specific issue that he's raising with the incoming president, which is the statements about a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican goods.
So no reason for you to go there?
Well, I'm doing the job that I was elected to do.
Okay.
I've had a very constructive discussion with President Trump, and it was very positive.
And look, just on his cabinet picks, I wanted to ask you about Tulsi Gabbard, who he's picked as Director of Intelligence Services there, Director of National Intelligence. There are concerns, I've been reading amongst Five Eyes partners as well, about her record. She's defended some of Russia's reasons for invading Ukraine, criticised Ukraine's president. Russian state media applauded her appointment. Are you comfortable? Would you trust sharing Australia's secrets with Tulsi Gabbard?
Oh, look, the relationship between Australia and the United States is a strong one. It's never been stronger than it is right now, and as Five Eyes partners, we cooperate through our intelligence agencies, and I'm sure that we'll continue to do so in the future.
Prime Minister, thanks for joining us throughout the year, and we look forward to talking more in the lead up to the election, whenever that happens to be.
Thanks very much, David, and keep your eye on the white car with the flag on the front. At some time between now and May, it will go to Government House, but there won't be an election on New Year's Day or New Year's week on the 3rd of January. I can confirm that.
Good to hear, Prime Minister. Thank you.
Thanks, David.